Only a wildfire revealed my siblings' true colors. The wildfire evacuation had thrown our lives into disarray. The relentless winds carried smoke and ash through the air, and the authorities' orders to leave Los Angeles left us with little time to think. My husband and I, clutching the hands of our 2 children, scrambled to pack what we could. As we drove away from the looming danger, uncertainty gnawed at me. With nowhere else to turn, I called my older brother, Mark, hoping he could provide the refuge we desperately needed. Mark opened his door with a welcoming smile, his familiar warmth a brief balm to our frayed nerves. He ushered us in, offering hugs and reassurance. But the moment I stepped inside, Julia's presence shifted the atmosphere. She stood a few steps back, her arms crossed tightly, her forced smile failing to mask her discomfort. It wasn't hostility outright, but her unease was palpable, like a thread pulled taut in the room. Mark seemed oblivious to her demeanor. But I wasn't. The flicker of resentment in her eyes hinted at a storm brewing beneath her polite exterior, a storm that would soon make itself known. The tension in Mark's house was palpable from the start. While Mark greeted us warmly, his wife, Julia, was less forthcoming, her forced smiles and clipped responses betraying her unease. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on settling my children into an unfamiliar environment. But as the hours turned into days, the atmosphere grew heavier, like an unspoken storm brewing in the corners of their home. One night, as I passed the kitchen, voices carried through the half-open door. "We can't just host them indefinitely," Julia said, her voice sharp and low, yet filled with irritation. "This disrupts everything." Mark's response was softer, tinged with exasperation. "They had no choice, Julia. It's family." The words stung. I stepped back into the shadows, feeling like an intruder in a space where I wasn't meant to hear. Memories of Julia's aloofness flashed in my mind, her disapproving glances at family dinners, her subtle but biting comments about my parenting. This was nothing new, yet hearing her opposition now, when my family was most vulnerable, hurt in ways I couldn't articulate. The following days were fraught with awkwardness. Meals were stilted, the air filled with Julia's barely disguised irritation. Mark, though kind in his initial welcome, gradually retreated, his compliance with Julia's coldness evident. My husband, quiet but perceptive, began to notice too. One evening, as we sat together in the guest room, he finally said, "This doesn't feel right. We're not welcome here." He was right. The strain was unbearable, and I could no longer subject my family to Julia's thinly veiled hostility. That night, I called my older sister, Anna. Her voice was warm, full of understanding. "Come," she said simply. "We'll make room." The next morning, we packed our belongings, thanking Mark for his hospitality with a politeness that felt hollow. As we drove away, I glanced back at the house, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. It wasn't the haven I had hoped for, but it had pushed us toward the possibility of finding comfort elsewhere. In the haze of uncertainty and desperation, I picked up the phone and called Anna, my older sister. She was my anchor in moments like this, someone whose unwavering kindness had always been a source of comfort. Explaining our situation, I barely finished speaking before she agreed without hesitation. Her voice carried a reassurance that made my heart lighter. "Come here right away," she said firmly, adding that her husband, Robert, was also eager to welcome us. "Don't worry about him, he understands." Anna's home was a considerable distance away, but I didn't mind the journey. I held on to the faith that her affection for me, so consistent throughout the years, would translate into a warm embrace for my family. The long road ahead didn't feel as daunting when I thought of her smile and her ability to turn even the most chaotic situations into something manageable. With each mile closer to her house, I clung to the hope that this would be a refuge, a place where we could finally breathe without feeling like a burden. When we arrived at Anna's home, the contrast was striking. The warmth and genuine kindness radiating from my sister enveloped us like a long-awaited embrace. Anna, with tears in her eyes, welcomed us as though she had been preparing for this moment all along. Her compassion eased the heaviness that had followed us from Mark's house, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of relief. Her home was modest compared to Mark's smaller, with narrow hallways and rooms already filled with the bustling energy of her own family. But Anna's nurturing spirit made the space feel boundless. She didn't hesitate for a moment. rearranging her home to accommodate us. Her children willingly gave up their bedrooms, squeezing into a single shared space without complaint. Anna moved with efficiency, as if orchestrating an impromptu symphony of support, ensuring every detail was handled with care. Robert, her husband, remained in the background, neither outwardly welcoming nor resistant. His quiet neutrality was a stark contrast to Anna's effusive hospitality. But it was enough. He didn't object or add tension, and for that, I was grateful. The house may have been small and crowded, but the sense of belonging it offered was immeasurable. Anna's selflessness reminded me of what family should be: a haven, no matter the circumstances. At first, our unexpected arrangement at Anna's home seemed to work seamlessly. My children quickly bonded with Anna's kids, their laughter weaving through the small house like a balm for the chaos we had endured. They played together in the backyard, inventing games that only children could, oblivious to the stress and uncertainty hanging over the adults. Watching them brought a rare sense of peace, a reminder of the resilience that comes so naturally to the young. Anna's unwavering kindness was a constant source of comfort. She treated us not as guests but as an extension of her own family, anticipating our needs before we could voice them. Meals were shared with an ease that belied the strain of squeezing two households into one. Despite the tight quarters and limited resources, Anna's nurturing spirit made every day feel a little less overwhelming. As I reflected on the difference between Anna's open-hearted generosity and Julia's cold indifference, the gratitude I felt for my sister deepened. Anna's home, though small and modest, brimmed with warmth and acceptance. It was a stark contrast to the hostility we had faced at Mark's house, and I couldn't help but feel profoundly fortunate to have Anna as my sister. At first, merging our family with Anna's felt like a blessing amidst the chaos. Her warm welcome and genuine empathy had been a balm to our frayed nerves, and Robert's reserved but polite demeanor made the transition seem manageable. But as the days turned into weeks, the initial harmony began to unravel. What started as a temporary refuge from the wildfire evacuation now felt like an increasingly uncomfortable arrangement, where unspoken tensions simmered just beneath the surface. The differences were subtle at first, variations in routines, parenting styles, and personal habits that we tried to overlook. My children, used to more freedom at home, found themselves at odds with Anna's stricter rules. The bedtime disagreements became a nightly ritual, with Anna gently reminding my kids to follow her household norms while I tried to mediate. Feeling caught between gratitude and guilt. David, my husband, was perhaps the most visibly affected. Initially grateful for Anna and Robert's hospitality, he began withdrawing, his discomfort growing with each passing day. I would catch him standing at the window, his jaw tight, his eyes distant. He volunteered for chores he normally despised: washing dishes, fixing a leaky faucet, not out of kindness but as a way to contribute, to justify our presence. "I feel like a burden," he admitted one night, his voice low and heavy. His pride, once a source of strength, now seemed to weigh him down, magnifying his feelings of inadequacy. Robert, though polite, began showing subtle signs of frustration. His smiles grew thinner, his words clipped. He started spending more time in his study, emerging only for meals or brief interactions. Once, when the children accidentally knocked over a glass of juice on the couch, I saw the flicker of irritation in his eyes before he calmly cleaned it up. It was a small moment, but it spoke volumes. No matter how kind and patient Robert was, our presence was disrupting the carefully balanced rhythms of their household. Anna, ever the peacemaker, worked tirelessly to smooth over the cracks. She offered words of encouragement, insisting that family sticks together, even as I noticed the subtle weariness in her eyes. Her efforts to maintain harmony didn't go unnoticed, but they couldn't erase the underlying friction. Meals became quiet affairs, with the occasional awkward exchange breaking the silence. The once welcoming atmosphere now felt strained, a fragile truce that could be shattered by the smallest misstep. For me, the guilt was overwhelming. I felt torn between my gratitude toward Anna and Robert and my growing awareness that our stay was testing the limits of their generosity. Every kind gesture from Anna was tinged with the unspoken reality that we were intruding on their lives. I wondered how long we could stay before the bonds of family began to fray under the weight of our prolonged presence. As tensions built, I realized that while Anna and Robert had opened their home to us out of love, no arrangement like this could last without strain. The cracks were widening. And with each passing day, the looming question grew louder: how much longer could we impose on their kindness before the cost became too great for all of us? The initial harmony of our shared living arrangement began to dissolve under the pressure of merging two households. Minor disagreements over shared spaces, like whose turn it was to use the kitchen or how the living room should be arranged, became regular points of contention. What started as small frustrations grew into tense arguments that neither Anna nor I could seem to avoid. Anna and I had always been close, but the stress of our new reality began to expose cracks in our bond. Meal planning turned into a daily negotiation. Anna, ever the organizer, tried to maintain her family's strict routines, while my family, still adjusting to the disruption of being displaced, struggled to follow her schedule. "We have to stick to a plan, or it's chaos," she said one evening, her voice firm but laced with exhaustion. I tried to accommodate, offering to cook on certain days or shop for groceries, but my efforts often felt like they fell short of her expectations. Laundry became another source of friction. With so many people in one house, the washer and dryer seemed to run nonstop, and scheduling who could use them became an unspoken competition. "I left my basket here last night," Anna pointed out one morning when she found my clothes still spinning. Her tone was calm, but her frustration was clear. I apologized, feeling the sting of guilt. But the unease lingered between us. The children, who had initially bonded like lifelong friends, began to mirror the tension between the adults. Arguments over toys, screen time, and even who got to sit where at dinner erupted with increasing frequency. Anna and I tried to manage the conflicts, but our differing parenting styles only added to the strain. I could tell Anna was biting her tongue at times, unwilling to criticize me directly, but the tension in her demeanor was unmistakable. "They're just kids," I offered once, trying to defuse the situation. "Yes, but structure is important," she replied curtly, her tone betraying her growing frustration. Robert, always polite but distant, began retreating more and more into his study. He excused himself from family meals, citing work deadlines or phone calls. The weariness in his face was hard to ignore, and it became clear that the strain of our extended stay was affecting him as well. "Robert's just busy," Anna explained when I asked about him one evening, but her tight smile suggested otherwise. Despite everything, Anna tried to remain kind. One night, after a particularly tense day, she sat down beside me in the living room. "We'll figure this out," she said softly, her voice more tired than reassuring. "I know this isn't easy for anyone." I nodded, wanting to believe her. But the weight of being an unintentional burden pressed heavily on me. No matter how much I tried to help, offering to clean, take the kids out to give them space, or even suggesting we contribute financially, it never felt like enough. The unspoken reality was becoming clearer with each passing day. Our presence was testing the limits of Anna and Robert's patience. Even the strongest bonds can fray under the weight of proximity and stress. As much as we loved each other, the cracks were widening, and I began to wonder how long this arrangement could last before it broke completely. The breaking point arrived like an inevitable storm, brewing silently until it unleashed chaos. The incident seemed minor at first, a simple mistake. My youngest child, in their innocent curiosity, had accidentally knocked over a decorative vase in Anna's living room. The sound of shattering porcelain echoed through the house, drawing everyone into the room. Anna stood frozen, her face pale as she stared at the broken fragments. "That vase was a wedding gift," she finally said, her voice tight and trembling. Before anyone could respond, Robert's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "This is exactly what I've been talking about," he said, his frustration unmasked. He rarely spoke openly about his feelings, but now it was as if a dam had broken. "This arrangement has gone on too long. Our home isn't built to handle this chaos." The words stung, their sharpness lingering in the air. My husband, seated nearby, visibly tensed. Slowly, he rose, his voice calm but edged with steel. "We didn't choose this situation, Robert. None of us did. But we're doing the best we can under these circumstances. We've been nothing but respectful of your space." Robert's expression darkened, his frustration spilling over. "Respectful? Noise all day, accidents like this, disrupting every routine we have. How is that respectful?" His voice rose, carrying the weight of weeks of suppressed irritation. This was supposed to be temporary, but it feels endless. My husband didn't back down, his voice growing firmer. We're not here by choice, Robert. We've done everything to minimize the impact on your family. Have you ever considered what we're going through? The argument escalated rapidly, each man's words striking like blows. They stood facing each other, voices raised, their frustration feeding off the other's anger. The room, which had once felt like a refuge, now felt suffocating. Anna, who had been silent until now, finally stepped between them. Enough, she shouted, her voice cracking under the strain. The room fell silent, the tension crackling like static. She looked at Robert, then at me and my husband, her gaze filled with exhaustion and pain. I've been trying to keep this family together. Anna began, her voice trembling. But this is too much. I opened my home because I wanted to help, because you're my sister. But I feel like I'm drowning. Every day. It's something new. I can't keep pretending this isn't tearing us apart. Her gaze locked onto me, her words sharp and direct. I feel like you're taking advantage of us. I understand you're in a terrible situation. But do you even see what it's doing to us? Her words landed with the weight of a boulder, crushing the fragile foundation of the gratitude I'd clung to. I felt my throat tighten. My chest ache with the weight of unspoken guilt. I wanted to defend myself, to explain how much we had tried to keep the peace, but the truth was undeniable. Our presence here, no matter how necessary, had disrupted their lives in ways I hadn't fully grasped. Anna's voice softened, but the pain in her words remained. This isn't sustainable, she said. Her shoulders sagging under the weight of the admission. We're all trying, but it's breaking us. My husband placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, his presence grounding me in the storm of emotions. I glanced at him, then back at Anna, and for the first time since we arrived, I felt truly out of place. The bond we had shared as sisters, the warmth and love that had defined our relationship, felt strained to its breaking point. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert retreated to his study without another word, slamming the door behind him. Anna stood there, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. My husband and I exchanged a glance, the unspoken understanding between us clear: we couldn't stay here any longer. As I gathered my children that evening, the weight of the fractured relationships bore down on me. What had started as a desperate plea for safety had spiraled into something unrecognizable: a family divided by the strain of shared spaces, disrupted routines, and unmet expectations. The home that had once welcomed us with open arms now felt like a prison, and I feared the walls we had built between us would take years to dismantle. The news arrived like a sudden reprieve after a storm. A notice from the Los Angeles County Fire Department revealed that the evacuation order for our neighborhood had been a mistake. Our home had never been in danger, and the relief swept through me like a wave. My family's initial reaction was pure joy, a release of tension that had been building since the day we fled. Yet, as we prepared to leave Anna's home, the air remained heavy with unspoken words and fractured emotions. Our departure was filled with hurried farewells and a lingering sense of discomfort. Anna and her family stood at the doorway, their smiles polite but strained. The children exchanged hugs, oblivious to the underlying tension that had transformed what should have been a refuge into a battlefield of clashing routines and exposed vulnerabilities. My husband loaded the car, his expression distant, as if he too was reflecting on the unanticipated strain our presence had caused. As we drove away, a mix of gratitude and guilt churned within me. The wildfire, though never reaching our home, had illuminated an undeniable truth: family relationships, no matter how close, are fragile when boundaries are stretched too thin. Anna's generosity had been genuine, but the pressures of blending two households had exposed the limits of even the strongest bonds. I realized then that while family might always be a sanctuary in times of crisis, even sanctuaries have their breaking points. As I stood in Anna's kitchen one last time, the weight of the past week settled heavily on my shoulders. The warmth and love that had once defined our relationship now felt stretched, worn thin by the unrelenting demands of shared space and disrupted routines. Anna's kindness and support had been nothing short of sincere, yet I could see the toll our presence had taken her tired eyes, her subdued energy, and the tension that now lingered between us like an unwelcome guest. I realized then that staying any longer would only deepen the cracks that had begun to form. Though her love for me and my family was steadfast, the prolonged closeness had placed a strain on our bond that neither of us had anticipated. It was time to leave, not out of frustration or resentment, but out of respect for the relationship we both valued so deeply. I approached Anna with a quiet resolve, expressing my gratitude for all she had done for us in our time of need. I apologized for the unintentional disruption we had caused, my words tinged with a mix of guilt and appreciation. As I prepared to leave, I promised myself that the distance between us would no longer feel like a burden, but a safeguard to preserve the love and understanding we shared. As I packed the last of our belongings, the weight of the past week settled in my heart, mingling relief with lingering sadness. The wildfire that had driven us to seek refuge with Anna's family had done more than disrupt our lives. It had revealed the delicate balance that exists within familial bonds. I had come to cherish Anna's unwavering support and the deep-rooted love that bound us as siblings. But I also understood now that closeness, when prolonged and unplanned, could test even the strongest relationships. Living together had laid bare the differences in our routines, habits, and unspoken expectations, each moment of friction eroding the ease that once defined our connection. Yet, amid the tension, I found clarity. Love between siblings doesn't demand constant proximity but flourishes in mutual respect and the space to grow independently. As we prepared to leave, I felt a profound gratitude for Anna's sacrifice and a newfound respect for the boundaries that protect relationships from strain. The wildfire may have disrupted our lives, but it had also illuminated a truth I would carry forward sometimes: distance is the truest form of love. As I reflected on the whirlwind of events, I began to see the wildfire not just as a force of destruction but as a harsh yet necessary teacher. Challenges and trials in life rarely come without purpose. They arrive uninvited, disrupting our comfort, but they reveal truths we might otherwise overlook. This ordeal had forced me to confront difficult realities about relationships, priorities, and the people I could truly rely on when the ground beneath me felt unsteady. In the midst of chaos, it became clear who stood unwaveringly by my side. True love and loyalty reveal themselves not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, selfless acts of those willing to bear our burdens alongside us. Anna's open arms and willingness to share her home, despite the inevitable strain, reminded me of the depth of her love. Even Robert's reserved patience spoke volumes about his commitment to family, proving that support often comes in subtle but powerful forms. The wildfire had tested our bonds, but it also strengthened my understanding of what mattered most. It's in the flames of adversity that we see the purity of genuine love and the hands that are willing to lift us when we fall.